Hi, welcome to One Degree Shifts. I'm your host, Pascal Tremblay. I'm the co-founder of Nectar. We're a psychedelic support ecosystem. And today I'm super honored and thrilled to have Gibrán Rivera, who I first met briefly in 2016 at Hollyhock. And my experience of Gibrán at the time was as a facilitator for a group experience throughout a week-long event called the Social Change Institute. And he left an impression on me in the way that he held the space, in the way that he facilitated, and also the ideas that he was bringing forward in the space, and really creating a very engaged and very heartfelt conversation between people. And it left an impression on me. And years later, 5 or 6 years later, I reached out to him again and was pleasantly surprised and very excited that he started working with plant medicines during that time. And we aligned on a lot of the things that he's up to in the world. So here he is today on the podcast. Hi, Gibrán.
Hello, Pascal. So good to be connecting with you again. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm thrilled to be connecting with you and your audience. I got to tell you, 1 degree shifts. What wisdom is already embedded in the title of the podcast. I love it.
Thank you. And I feel like the conversation today is quite linked to that concept as well. And for people who don't know you, can you give us a kind of a brief story of Gibrán for what you're up to in the world and what interests you?
Absolutely. You might have to stop me, I know you have full consent to do that. You know. But how to introduce myself? I am the son of Pedro and Aixa. I am the father to Darshan. I am the lover and the partner of Tuesday. I'm a co-parent with Darshan's mother, Samantha. I am devoted to the goddess. I was born in Puerto Rico, and at the age of 12, we moved to Western Massachusetts. And I often start my story there because I thought my life in Puerto Rico was perfect, and I didn't want to move, and it was like something was being done to me. And at that age, I became a minority. I became a person of color. And that was not a pleasant experience, not in the United States. And that kind of moved me, gave me like a thirst for justice that took some time to make sense of. But interestingly enough, Pascal, we also moved for very unique reasons. We moved to be part of a religious community, and people often think that means like a commune. It wasn't. It was more of an idea, a group of families spread over 3 cities that shared a kind of religious covenant. So in a weird way, we came for religious reasons, and the particular practice was something called the charismatic renewal. And I bring this up because even though it's not what I follow, it involved a Pentecostalist expression, and people might not know what that means either. It's like when you see movies, or maybe people are actually participant, like those kind of Christian religious expressions that include praying in tongues, and people are jumping up and down and raising their hands in the air, and everybody's praying at the same time but with different words, and people get slain in the spirit. And I bring that up because as problematic as like the dogma was, it was a very somatic, right, and fiery experience of the divine. I think that has been formative. That has really defined me. I became an organizer. I became an activist. I became involved in politics as somebody very concerned with justice. And then I had one of those experiences in which your life falls completely apart. My life broke down, and it was through my own doing. And in that breakdown, there was a very potent spiritual awakening. And through that spiritual awakening, I got into the work of facilitation, and I knew that this was my vocation. And you meet me a couple of like cycles into that specific growth. I am still a facilitator. I support group process. I'm also a coach. I'm a guide, and I'm often find myself in the role of teacher.
Beautiful. And what is your relationship to justice when it comes to medicine work in general, or your own path? Like what is the role of justice in that?
That is a very layered question. Because there's a fundamental way, let's start at the surface level, which is the way the medicine ways are coming into the West. They're not very accessible, they're expensive pathways. And that's true even if for people that want to work with me, so oftentimes I'll try to kind of charge a premium of those who can, and then make it more accessible to those that lack. But at the very basic level, that's not just. At another level, sometimes the communities that have held these ways for the longest are excluded, right, from the material, from what is happening materially in the field among some, or let's not even get into what pharmaceuticals are doing with what Mother Nature has given us. And I don't. So those are ways to easily point towards injustice in this path. But I want to just say something more positive or affirmative, which is in that transition for me from more activist organizer to facilitator, I was making a conscious move away from the purely adversarial, right? There is something that the medicine path makes available to us, not by magic, it demands our engagement, where we can begin to heal in such a way that our resentments can start to drop away. And healing is almost synonymous with letting go of resentment, with grieving for the harm that has been caused, and then let the resentment go. And I feel like too much of the discourse of justice is still embedded in a language of justified resentment. And it only feeds into a politics of resentment that are also held by the reactionary right. So it ends up like both poles are swimming in the poisonous waters of resentment, and the medicine paths connected to something broader, to broader spiritual practice and broader spiritual community, allow us to begin to unlock the grip of resentment in our psyche and our consciousness. And in our ideologies seem to support resentment. They seem to encourage it and kindle it, which is counter to the kind of reclaiming of our humanity that the medicine is supposed to.
And it's sort of a paradox, like you're fighting for justice, and yet you have to let go of resentment. You have to shed the layers of the fight, almost like fighting in a different way almost, which I think to me personally speaks to the paradox of psychedelics as well, which is we want to heal, we want to transform, we want to cure ourselves, we want to let go of the layers and the resentment and the anger and the fear. And so for a lot of people, that means doing psychedelics in a way where they're seeking something. And we've talked about this before, Gibrán, is the idea of giving up seeking. And you've had a personal journey around that. Would you like to share what your journey's been?
I am so happy that you took note of that in our earlier conversation, because it has literally changed my relationship to psychedelics, and it connects in a way to what I was talking about earlier with that kind of charismatic Pentecostalist experience of the divine. Always kind of a fiery exuberance to it. Always very vivid. And that's a beautiful thing. I wish it upon more people. I then engaged a yogic path, a path that followed a tantric tradition that was kind of very ecstatic and beautiful, still central to my understanding of the world. And then I came upon the medicine path, which can be really strenuous, arduous, and hard, but it can also really bring you face to face with the divine and the ecstasy of that, and the ecstasy of being together and recognizing yourself, all of those things. But recently, it was a process. It wasn't all at once, but it can narrow down to this moment in which I was experiencing that euphoric sensation of union with the big THAT, whatever you want to call it, God or the universe or that which is singular, and I was just like, wow, right? And thankfully, through grace, and I have been working on this for a while, that moment, it was like, you, Gibrán, think that this is God, and that's where your mistake is. Like, you think that this explosive experience is the thing. And so you keep chasing after it. And I think that is one of the traps of psychedelics, right? Like, you keep chasing after the explosive experience. And so then you're failing to integrate into the mundanity of everyday life, which is why we journey. Like, we journey, right? So that we can experience truth here and understand that if it is not here in this conversation between you and I, Pascal, there is nowhere to be found. And any search outside of here, it's a waste of time, which is not to say that taking medicine is a waste of time, but to take it with the thought that is going to somehow perfect what is already perfect, that is a mistake. That is being misguided, and I have been so misguided myself.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before that at some point you overcorrected around this. I'd love to hear more about that too.
Oof, my God. Well, I just want to commend you again. I feel really heard. We had a previous conversation, Pascal and I just really appreciate the care. Yeah, so then, as I don't know if everybody else is like me, but, you hear a message. I'm going to keep using the word God, but that's just what I'm comfortable with. People can substitute however they are. I'm not dogmatic about it. But I don't like to shy away from it either. Let me go on a quick tangent here, which is part of what gets lost in this kind of spiritual but not religious vibe is the idea of God as thou, Look, I come from a non-dualist tradition. I don't imagine that there's another entity that is alien to me that is God. But I do think that we benefit from, as humans, and this is ancestral, from understanding the divine inside of ourselves. So God as I, understanding the divine as like the wonders of the universe, right? From like what we see in nature and the high peaks or the waters or the universe, God as that. And that we benefit from the idea of God as thou, an anthropomorphized idea before which you can bow your head, right? Against which your ego can clash, right? Somewhere to surrender, something to pray to. So that's a tangent. That's not what you asked, but
I love that tangent because I'll go my own tangent off your tangent.
Yes.
I have a really good friend, David Gomes, who's one of my best friends, and in his practice, he's made a stand of just bringing the word God back more into his practice, because what he shares that ultimately all we want to do as humans is connect back to the divine or the God consciousness. And without us actually knowing it, for a lot of us, it's actually our primary goal is to reconnect with the divine. And so I thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. I'll say one last thing about it for now, which is Thomas the Train. Thomas the Train is not God, just to be clear. But you put eyes and a mouth on a train, right? And children can feel a relationship to that train. They can treat it like a living entity, We anthropomorphize. It is easier for us to commune with something that we can imagine as a being with eyes and a face, you know? And I feel like that's all we're doing when we're calling God God. It's like, no, like I don't believe there's an alien somewhere, right? But it's like this force that permeates the universe. If I can give it a name, you know, I can give it a face, then it is easier for me to make prostrations, and I am always a better man when I make prostrations regularly. To get back, so then God said, I'm like, okay, if God says to me like, get off this stuff, you know, like not get off it, but like the medicine is, you know, you are looking in the wrong direction. Like you're coming back to this well to satisfy your seeking self and to not come to terms with life and its terms and the fact of what is here and now. The medicine itself in recent ceremonies was like, hey, you're taking that idea too far, Gibrán. You know, you are not being asked to stop journeying altogether. That's not for you right now. That's not it. So then the question becomes, so what is my posture when I journey? You know, and I journey less, for sure. But when I do, I am doing a number of things. Mainly, I am visiting with a teacher. The same way, Pascal, that I would visit with you and rejoice in your company, or if you and I had an elder that held more wisdom than us and that lived somewhere in the forest, you and I would go out and seek that person and be with them and learn from them. Not because we thought anything was missing, but because we grow from entities, beings, humans that know more than us. So that's one. There's a different posture. It's not, this is going to fix me, but it's a visit with a master. Another way in which I journey is I have a teacher that helps me learn more about how to guide, because he's got 35 years more experience than me. And so one of the key ways in which he teaches me is by guiding me, right? And it's amazing because I can take the same compound that I would take without him, and the experience is explosively different, right? Because of what he holds and the trust that I can have. And then finally, I might journey to be in communion and community with friends, or very, very specially. And again, all of this it's less times than it sounds. Might be with my beloved, you know, for the sake of deepening our relationship, both spiritually and oftentimes, for pleasure itself. Like, you know, a journey with her can take the shape of, can have so many phases over a day, where like there's deep, intense work happening, there's playfulness happening, and there's just like explosive worlds of sexual bliss unfolding for us, you know. And I think that's sacred too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're sharing beautifully is that the medicine is an optional sacrament, and that you said so well before as well, there's communion in the process itself. How does that show up for you in the everyday life? How do you bring these states or these connections or these openings with God and divine consciousness into your everyday mundane life?
It's a good question, and a beautiful one. I can tell you that this is something I've learned through therapy, and it's important to mention this because psychedelics are not a substitute for therapy, right? Psychedelics are best taken in the not. I want to be clear here. I don't think we should take them. The only way to take psychedelics is in a therapeutic framework, as is being pushed in the West right now. But you should have a therapist when you use psychedelics, and you should have a spiritual community, and you should have a somatic practice. I'm riffing here on the importance of therapy because I had an uncle, my father's eldest brother, died in a motorcycle accident. I must have been 5, and I knew that had happened, but I didn't have a full understanding of that it had an impact on me psychologically, right? Of course, it would, but it wasn't in my awareness. I was a kid. My uncle died, But as I was digging out stuff through therapy, I saw that I learned that at that age, I saw my grandmother writhing, right? As basically a human being experienced the worst anguish that I believe a human being can experience, which is, we can almost take anything happening to our bodies, but something happening to our child is just, it's this thing that can't be. And somewhere in me, I understood the tragedy of human existence, and some decision got made in which I had to be fully alive, because this could end at any time. And that's a great choice. But as a young person and later on as an adult, that has tended to mean lit, on fire, right? And so I can facilitate these experiences and just do all of these things. But it's actually, that I've discovered, is also the shadow side. It's like a rebellion against the mundane, right? It's almost like some small young part of me feels like getting too mundane is getting close to death, right? It's not being alive, right? And so so the question that you ask is very prescient and very important to where I am on my journey. And so I often say to Tuesday's a woman I love, I say to her, how is it possible that I have seen the face of God 1,000 times and I can still forget, And she says to me something, and I don't say it to flatter myself, but it's an important reminder, and it's good to have people in your life that remind you. She said, Gibrán, what you seem to forget is that you are walking in the world like somebody that has seen the face of God 1,000 times. It is possible that every single day my subjective experience is one of me throwing at least 1 minute fit about something completely insignificant, there are days that you don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to work out. All of those things are still part of my day-to-day life, The days when you snap at the wrong person. Certainly the days when I'm not the father I want to be. So I'm far from calling myself some kind of liberated being that walks around without foibles, without having to contend with the flesh, right? And the kind of our humanity. But I can also tell you with confidence that I just had a birthday less than a month ago. And that it was my best birthday yet. And that it wasn't because I had the best party. Because I didn't even have a party this year, which I usually have throw a big party for my birthday. And it was quite private. I was offline, I was with my beloved. But it's to get to your question. I'm gonna get to it. I like the distinction between states and stages. So a state is like when we go into medicine space, we enter the state, and then that state goes away, right? And when you dance, you can get into a state, or there's flow states that last for a long time, or flow states that just last for a bit, or we come in and out of states. Stages are different in that they're developmental. They have a sequence. So sort of, they have an order, and they can't be undone. So speaking, no words, some words, putting sentences together. If you're anywhere like me, you never stop talking, right? And that's a sequence, and that can't be undone. And so what I'm trying to say, Pascal, is that if we engage the spiritual path, which for many of us includes medicine, with seriousness, joy, but seriousness, some rigor, in the context of community, understanding that integration in between the peak experiences is as important as the experiences themselves, we actually grow at the level of stages of development. Like we get to places where it can, some of what you see and have come to know can no longer be taken away. And I feel like there is something to what has been given to me by grace, not exclusively in medicine, but through like the spiritual paths in general, that can no longer be undone, right? There is an irrefutable faith. There is a lack of belief in death, which is not to say we fine if a dear one dies, or that I'm gonna like happily jump into my end, but like there's something fundamental in me that knows it doesn't exist, right? And those things give us a kind of freedom, and it also helps us. Those people who are listening, who are guides, or aspiring to be guides. When you're holding somebody in their healing, when you have that kind of unshakable understanding of the inherent goodness in a life and a world that can be so tragic, that's the medicine, that you bring to the ceremony.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love the analogy between states and stages. And what came up to me while you were sharing was that, as we go through the different stages, there's a certain, I think, perspective of the medicine space where there's sort of like an endpoint at some point. And so my question to you is, like, what stage are you in now, and what's next for you? Do you think about that sometimes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely think there's no end, which is different from whether the medicine space has an end or not. I can't tell you. I am open to one day medicine saying enough, or saying even less. You know what I mean? Like, visit me on this once a year, or whatever it might be. I don't know what medicine will say. I can tell you that we should all be thinking of it as, maybe that's not true. I think it should taper. I don't know that the math is perfect, but I do like Jamie Wheel's contention that there is the Pareto principle applies, where like you get so much in like 20% of your early engagement, right? And then you kind of get lost in the idea that like you're going to linearly keep growing at that same pace. And no, like it subsides, right? Like it's like relate to it that way. Like so that's one thing I would say. And I would say that path-wise, do hold the faith and believe that, there's this remembering and forgetting, and the forgetting can get lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser. And so if I dare to imagine what is next for me in my own spiritual development, is like less and less and less forgetting, right? Less and less and less forgetting. Is there a point where there's no forgetting? Some t-shirts seem to claim there is, Sometimes I feel like I have held that belief at times, and I felt like I have not held it at other times, and I feel like lately I want to believe it again, but not get lost in the possibility. I'm keen on the teachings of this beautiful British guy called Rupert Spira, who is a great non-dualist, and I recommend his yoga meditations on YouTube to be listened to, like sitting down in his meditation. The intro is powerful. But he speaks of this other sage that many people might know in the psychedelic world called Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was another guy that was kind of this kind of non-dual full identification with the divine. And what I heard from Rupert was that they asked him like, what happens like in your life? He just goes, well, I just keep getting happier and happier. So I do think even if you're like at this state of like no longer forgetting, the kind of unfolding of joy, I think it can be limitless. And that's my faith. And it's part of my experience, I would say. I can tell you my heart only seems to have gotten bigger over time.
Beautiful. And like you spoke earlier about the journey too, is the finding the beauty and the richness and the connection in the journey of exploring these things. And somewhere along my path, I sort of fell in love with the process. I instead of trying to fight my demons, I started dancing with them a little bit more and appreciating that they exist. And I'm kind of looking at the painting behind you as well as maybe a potential metaphor here for the path, which is this beautiful crane kind of flowing his beautiful wings, and this other person is kind of dancing, but also facing it and kind of expressing itself with it and against it in some way. There's a beautiful balance there. Appreciating the journey. And you've mentioned this a couple of times now in the call, and I've heard you say it so beautifully before, and in two different ways. It's the idea of community. And the way you call it sometimes is the we space. And a newsletter that you shared just recently, you said community is an act of resistance. Can you share more about community as an act of resistance? I really love that sentence.
Absolutely, I will do that. So interestingly, I mentioned we moved to the mainland from Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a colony. So we moved to the mainland United States and to live in community, an intentional community, and I experienced the best and the worst of that, you know. And so, for example, today there are like social justice communities that kind of remind me more of that fundamentalist community, meaning a kind of fundamentalism and rigidity where like these communities are a structure of belonging, but it's very brittle because they're held together by the thread of exile. Right? And when something's held together by the thread of exile, that gives you all kinds of belonging, but it also there's this fear that is constantly in the background. And so that's not what I mean. But I also always have wanted to rescue what is the best of that. And I can tell you that, you know, you're a parent. The way we're bringing up kids as nuclear families is impossible. Like it drives the parents crazy, particularly and especially today, the mother, right? Like it's never meant to be that way. Francis Weller, who wrote a beautiful book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, a great book on grief, he says that our first grief is like we're supposed to be born to 100 pairs of eyes, you know, and we're born to like something like 6, our parents and grandparents, and so there is that's all done so that every household can have a car and a refrigerator and a water. It's all like for capitalism's sake, the atomization, the nuclear, and then we're busy all the time. So we don't have time for our friends, right? And so when those are the socioeconomic conditions that we're literally bred into, right? When the society doesn't even spend time helping you nurture wisdom, which is what makes you human, but instead helping you identify yourself as a consumer, right? And as this identity that you perform on social media for your brand, like all of those things are the emptiness of that is the opposite of community. And so to build community in light of that, in fact, given the fact that we are in a tidal wave that is against it, is an act of resistance, and it is quite honestly like the pathway to survival. So I want to say one more thing, if you don't mind, just to make a distinction, and it might be too nuanced. People, forgive me if I'm getting nerding out too much here, but I want to make a sort of distinction between the we space and community. They're interconnected. They're woven together. Not always the same. I see community as a structure of belonging. Is highly interpersonal. You will like people. We don't like some people, but we're in community with them. We tolerate them to stay in community. We bend in order to like do things that are not always the preference I would have if we were only a household, and so there's a lot of interpersonal dynamics in friendship and community that are essential for us to like learn to navigate, to be with, to stay in boundaries, whatever. Then all of that. We're very interpersonal. The structure of belonging that demand interpersonal, that come with like great interpersonal joy and demand interpersonal work. They're not given. I also think of the we space as transcending the interpersonal, as being more intersubjective, or what my teachers call interbeing, where a group of us is gathered and we are tapping an aliveness, an intelligence, a consciousness that is alive in the space between us, but it's itself, and we are placing ourselves at the service of it. And so like what comes out of our mouth is less our thought and our opinion, but what this space is speaking to through us, and there's multiple communities and experiments working with this kind of we space. I'm especially affiliated with the work of Emergent Consciousness Dialogue as held in Germany by my teachers and friends, Elizabeth de Bold and Thomas Steinberg, and I'm a part of that community. But there's other efforts, and so the kind of we space I'm talking about is different in that way. Again, I think we can get into it. I don't think one replaces the other, but there's a distinction there, and I think I would say my spiritual thrust, like the edge of my spiritual work and of my work as a facilitator, the very edge of it is that we space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And specifically to the psychedelic community, you shared this in a newsletter. I'll just read it a little bit here. You said that psychedelics are best seen as an episodic sacrament that exists in the context of community, a community that regularly gathers without psychedelics, people and families who come together regularly to celebrate, contend with, and bow before the mystery of life and its terms. And you said you don't need psychedelics, but you need community. And I really like the way you phrased that.
Thank you for that. And that is the truth, man. That is the truth. It is. I was doctoring somebody recently, and oh my God, it was harrowing. She was an elder, and as an elder, she was working through like very young childhood trauma, and there comes a point in the healing journey, particularly with the use of psychedelics, where like the step has to be to relive the event, And so I'm watching this elder kind of relive horror, just horror, perpetrated on her as a child, and it was powerful. The medicine was working, and I was doing my work, and I think I was doing it well. But it just hit me then and there in the middle of it. I'm like, this can't be it. It can't be that this is all she has. It can't be that this is all we have. It can't be that we can have it. We should have it, but it can't be that like this kind of exceptional moment of me singularly as an individual coming here and dealing specifically with my trauma, or some of my favorite work is with groups, like coming periodically to do this. It can't be it. It's just the trauma is too big. It propels you towards healing. It opens up new possibilities. But we need spaces that gather. We need spaces where we lift our voices and sing together. We need spaces where we dance together like our ancestors did. We need spaces where we ritualistically enact, almost as if it were plays, the archetypal entities that move through humanity. We need to, that kind of somatic experience of togetherness is integral. It's like all of our ancestors all over the world without exception, like each one of us. There's no human that doesn't come from that, right? And to have set it aside, I think is the only way we get to become the first generation that steals from our descendants to the point of possible extinction. We're stealing from the future because we just have lost our ways.
Right, and it's sort of the paradox of social media too, where for the first time in history, we've had a chance to connect with anyone in the world so rapidly, and yet it's a source of disconnection. And do you think that deepening our capacity to connect with one another is at the front lines of a paradigm shift?
Yes, I do. And but it must be said, that connecting with ourselves comes first, and that we don't even know how to do that. We're not being taught how to do that. We are bound by a false idea of who we are, because we lack structures of belonging. We are anxious, very anxious as a society. We are lonely. And in that anxiety and loneliness, we get more depressed, And so we end up being the most affluent society that has ever walked the earth. That's also the most medicated, the most depressed, the loneliest, and the most anxious. And so what the way to heal that is in community, but it's important to know that those conditions keep us from knowing ourselves, right? And so your own sense of worthiness, your own sense of you belong here among us, you get to be a part of this. We don't even have that. Too many of us are lacking that. And even when we're violently staking a claim and as, I don't know, successful businessmen, and I'm all for business, don't get me wrong, but making our name and playing our status games, and all of those things come from not knowing ourselves. And it's not that we shouldn't achieve. It's not that we shouldn't create awesome things, It's not that we shouldn't excel. All of that we should do. But we do it from a place of fullness. Not from this kind of gaping hole inside of ourselves that comes from not knowing who we are. So there's got to be some of that, some self-reflecting, knowing who you are, that becomes essential. Because if you enter relationship with a surface understanding of yourself, you're going to be very insecure in it. You're not going to be trusting in it. Therefore, you're not going to be trustworthy in it. And so the connection experiment will fall apart very quickly.
There's a big difference between loving someone out of love and loving someone out of need or out of want for feeling something within yourself. And we spoke about the disconnection between people and disconnection between people and themselves. And another one that came through for me in my last experience with psychedelics was this connection with spirit, knowing experientially that it's there, knowing, with actions that it's available and it's present, but not having the trust and the deep felt knowing that spirit is here and that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I didn't have that trust, and that thread between me and spirit was not in coherence. And so when I had that, I felt experience of that's transformed me. That was a new stage for me, for myself, of connection to spirit and really deeply knowing it. you want to talk a bit more about connection to spirit and how it plays such a pivotal role in, I believe, in community and the we space?
Yeah. I think the we space is spirit,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's spirit, and I think it's spirit speaking through us. I'm going to use a Christian metaphor, but I don't want it just because I grew up with it. It's not my current practice. But this thing happens. First of all, just like if you can put your triggers around Christian hegemony aside and play with it like one of those great archetypal stories that holds over time, because there's something in it, regardless of what the church does, that is true. So first of all, it has this being that is good, that is goodness embodied, that is medicine himself, that is love, right? And it's so much so that some people say it's God on earth, and people say it's like the Son of God, and it's very powerful. And I've only come to this understanding recently, to say, like, even the goodest among us, right? Even one who is of God nature is subject to the tragedy of human existence, subject to torture, subject to betrayal, subject, right? And I say that because oftentimes I have thought that maybe if I'm good enough, maybe if I meditate enough, maybe if I am kind enough to enough people, maybe if I eat well enough or exercise enough, I'll get a pass on these terms. And but these are the terms. Like, tragedy is not only possible but likely for all of us at any, right? Like, it will happen, right? And so to me, that's an important part of the story. But the other part is this happens, this murder, and then spirit descends upon those who held this love to be true, those who were able to recognize this divinity as it walked among them. They are not bereft of the being. In fact, spirit comes down, right? And they're touched with tongues of fire, right? And they become these people who are able to spread this message of love, right? Because they had that connection, because they were able to see, trust, and believe. I'll say two other things about this, which is my son's middle name is Tomas. And that's because his Chinese grandfather was called Tom, but I gave him Tomas in Spanish. But it's also because Thomas in the Christian religion is known as doubting Thomas. Thomas he said, I'm not going to believe that this body is resurrected until I put my hand in his wound, And there's this beautiful Caravaggio painting that has the hand of Thomas inside a kind of a torso wound of the Christ. Like, his finger is in there. And to me, he's not doubting one. He's the one that knows what the game is. You know what I mean? Like, no, I gotta touch God as flesh. You know what I mean? Like, it's this embodiment, right? It's this you, body, and mind walking up on this earth, right? That are the vessels of spirit itself. So that's one. And the other one is to speak about these 12 guys, because we can only think about the imperial colonialist church now. But for 300 years, these people are marginal and persecuted. They're fed to the lions, right? But they're doing this thing, this love thing, this tending to their neighbor thing, right? They're having this charisma, this fiery experiences that keeps them coming together, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're persecuted. And I think that kind of 300-year perspective is a good one too.
Yeah. Beautiful insight. What has been your evolution with connection to spirit over your times of medicine? Like, what's changed for you?
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because it's not a full. It's all so dynamic. But I can tell you that I left the Catholic Church I was bred in because kind of almost like political reasons. Like, I was like, feminism. It was like, I can't. I'm like fighting for justice, and this is a patriarchal system. Like, this doesn't hold water. Like, I can't negotiate it any further in my head. And some years later, it was September 11th. It was 3 years after the event. I wanted to do something spiritual. I was always very spiritual. I didn't have a church. I went to a meditation center. And in that a yogic tantric meditation center, tantric tradition, I received an initiation that I wasn't looking for. I didn't know what it was. It was a powerful transmission. And I experienced this non-dual experience. And it was without medicine. It took me a couple of years to come to terms with the fact that something had happened that I had to follow. It took me 2 years and life falling apart for me to get on my knees and be like, okay, I got it. I can't. I'm not going to set the terms. You're setting the terms. And the surrender began, And so I engaged a very powerful kind of ecstatic yogic path. I want to say 6-7 years of very, 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 very active, If you met me, I was in that. And it's not that I'm not, but it's just like it all has quieted. It all has kind of been more integrated inside of me. I bring that up because that path was very ascendant. Spirit, it was kind of transcendent, up and out towards the heavens, Like towards spirit. And somewhere around the 6-7 years, it was like, I almost felt like I was in a spiritual crisis because it was like that Shakti that seemed to be on call at any point was no longer there. But what I figured out was happening, it was like the energy was now coming back down. It was descending into the body, opening my lower chakras, which I was have been running away from because I was like trying to not live into patriarchy, right? Kind of reopening like the holiness of my sexuality, connecting me to the earth, to the holy feminine. And to the path, to the medicine path, right? So that's like, it was like a balancing out, more earthly, right? More shamanic than yogic, right? And somewhere along, so that has taken many, many shapes. And I had a long, recent stretch of this very powerful, like non-dual experiences of like total oneness with the divine, which were very reminiscent of that yogic initiation. And in some ways, if I'm honest, even had an addictive thing to them. Like as somebody that longs for God, that's where that confusion came in. That's where like I would keep going back to that well to have that feeling, to have that experience. And because I felt like when I wasn't in there, I couldn't experience that oneness. So now it's more about like seeing the oneness in the mundane, outside of medicine. But I'll give you one more answer because you asked, and I can't quite explain it. The last experience or two that I had, there's certainly one major one when I sat with my teacher last, where it was kind of back to this dualistic God. It was almost like I felt like it was very biblical, like I was just in this kind of. It was a very hard journey, very, very, very. I was put to the ringer. And after that, it was like this, like me, God, it was God as Thou. I was talking, it was all in Spanish, interestingly enough. And it was just kind of surrendered offering to this God as Thou again. So that's kind of what I can tell you. It's like, then the last time I worked with medicine, that was kind of spoken to me by the medicine. It was like, yeah, like I honoring this kind of non-dualistic approach that I've been really diving into, but being like, your path will always have something relational in it. There's something about God as thou that will matter to you, you know? And I thought about saints like Rumi or Hafiz, you know, the Sufi saints who are ecstatic and fully identify with God, but still dance with God. And I think I'll tell you this, Pascal, this is my life's aspiration. Should I be granted the life I pray for, which is a long, healthy, and joyful life with the full awareness that God sets the terms and that anything can happen at any time, but I can still pray for what I want. Should I get old? And as I get old, I'll lose ability, and the health will start to go. I want to be an old man in a room where I can no longer wipe my behind. I must be fed. There's probably saliva coming out of me as I think about my last seeing of my beautiful grandfather. I'm a mess, but I'm still hopefully my brain's still working. I want my brain to still be working, ideally. Not that I get to set the terms. But I tell you all of this, they're painting this picture because I want anyone that comes anywhere near the room, anywhere near the perimeter of that room, to feel God, to feel delight, to feel that there's some cultivated energy there, that there's devotion that I hold in my heart now, without me having to speak it, flows out of my pores vigorously, even when I have no vigor. That's how I would prefer to go, should I get a choice.
Total reconnection with the divine through your body and soul and mind.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful intention. Is there something that you'd like to share to people out there? Maybe people who are on a journey of discovery themselves or a journey of transformation. Is there any last parting words you'd like to share with them?
Yep. Have courage. There's definitely death involved, and I don't mean death of the body, but death to much of who you think you are. So have courage. Aim for integrity. You know, coming into integrity with yourself will align you with your power. Aim for integrity. Have courage. And have faith. And by that I don't mean like a religious faith, that's warmly, or just a spiritual faith, but when something happens, and you see something and something heals, allow yourself to believe in the healing. Allow yourself to believe in your own capacity to integrate it. You know, have faith that what we see, what we experience, the love we have for each other when we do it together is real and holds water long after the ceremony is over. Even if it's not as colorful, even if it feels more mundane.
Beautiful.
Love more and cling less. That's the ultimate one.
Where can people find you? What are you up to in the world? Where people can come or participate in what you're offering?
Yeah. I'm found at GibránRivera.com. I encourage people to please sign up for the newsletter.
And it's a really good newsletter, like everything Gibrán sends. I'm always reading it because it has a nugget of wisdom in there, or 10 of them. So I really enjoy it.
Thank you for the endorsement. Yeah. The newsletter is a great way. And then there's programs. You'll see different programs. I do coaching. I'm really keen on doing group coaching with people. Where like you get your individual coaching sessions, but you also are coached along with a cohort of like 3 other people, so 4 people at a time. I just feel like having others, again, back to this community, back to bringing the facilitation skills, are really cool ways to deepen and to kind of create like a 10-week cauldron for deep transformation.
Yeah, sweet. Thank you so much, Gibrán. Keep doing your good work and keep spreading the teachings and keep appreciating the mundane in everyday life.
Keep learning. Just check back in with me when I get better at it.
Bye.
Many blessings.